Sometimes great and wise publishers, and yet greater and wiser editors, show their wisdom by asking me to write a book. Sometimes also, to my sorrow, they add, "Write me one like The Scarlet Shoestring or The Rovers." Then am I compelled to quarry in the book bin for certain old volumes, which, though bearing a name on the cover which I cannot disavow, seem to have been written by somebody dead and buried long ages ago. But the wisest of all editors do not so. They know that, as one tree differeth from another in stature, so no book can, even with, on the author's part, the best will in the world, be a replica of any other. Now what these wise people ought to say to me at this stage of the negotiation is, get away as quickly as you can to your city of dream, and don't let us find your person blocking up our editorial staircase till a great book, a true book, a book absolutely unprecedented, has been revealed to you. Thus we will assure to ourselves a long rest. And when, having exhibited to them the empty state of my pockets, by the graphic method of turning them outside in, and so having moved them to advance me my railway fare, right gladly will I take me off, and make a bee-line for this little city, in which, after my double-barrelled smuggling trip, I now found myself. I will call it El Seo, though that is by no means its name, for it contains a cathedral so diminutive, indeed that it might be added to, say, Cologne Minster, without anybody but the architect and the charwoman discovering the difference. It has also a bishop, passing rich on the revenue of the average Scottish Minster, who has never applied for an augmentation, something that is on the underside of £200 a year, a bishop who acts in the spirit of his master, in what he was not ashamed to collogue openly with a certain out-at-elbows tramp and ex-smuggler who happened to be passing through his tiny episcopal city. El Seo is my own name for it, this quaint city of dream. But you may scan the rolls of the Archdiocese of Tarragona without being able to locate the smallest and most unworldly of cities ecclesiastic. For lest Messrs. Cook and Gaze should know of it, I have both photographically and in literary fashion mixed those babies up. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind as to his own particular city of dream, but if he is tempted to look for mine, I have taken good care that he shall not find it. Never did I see so many books ahead of me as in those sunny days I spent at El Seo. I drifted about idly, irresponsibly, as near nirvana as any son of Adam can expect to find himself this side the mouth of forgetfulness. Morning found me among the faithful in the cathedral. Aye, almost before the twilight. I had wrapped me in a huge Aragonese cloak, swinging it knowingly about my throat and mouth, for the ruby mist of sunrise in the city of dream often issues in a most undreamlike calentura. Then out towards the cathedral by brummish dusky streets, where sparse lights winked, rufescent in cobblers' shops, and under arches men still carried lanterns, till coming out suddenly into the open, lo, the great oleander flower of the dawn seemed to grow upon the cathedral tower as on a stalk. Behind that, the long level lines of the ancient citadel glowed purple and cinnamon. I stood watching the momently increasing brightness till the bell in the minster turret clanged for matins. Then 20 steps through a little square brought me to the cathedral portal. Dank smells of yesterday's incense, also some tang of the unwashen faithful of many generations. A rich gloom everywhere, Indian red dashed with yellow ochre, and through these the clear sweet light of a few candles winking deep in the chapels. There was no general service. The great altar was dark, its unlighted candles mere white bars against the denser gloom behind. Only the eastern windows had begun to blush with vague rich hintings of colour. The rest were yet sombre and very lonesome. In little side chapels, here and there, women knelt and priests were beginning to officiate in a heart-healing hush of peace. It was beautiful. Perhaps the next thing to a Scottish communion, and my heart ached within me to believe even as these folk about me believed. What a simple, unmurmuring earnestness there seemed about these poor working folk, both men and women of them, kneeling at this service of the breaking day and looking at these peasants. It came to me afresh that it matters hardly at all what a man believes, but altogether, solely and only how he believes it. I do not remember how I fed, or where, or on what, that first entranced day in the city of dream. Sometimes I saw so many wonderful things before my waking vision that I feared I should never have time to write them all down. There were children on the street. They played at skipping rope like bairns of other flesh and blood lands, but their cries fell on my ears far away, and musical as bells that ring in dreams. The town cows went out making low music, mysterious as those at Ravelston, of which the morning ghost still keeps the shadowy kine. Only I saw these of El Sale go out in the blaze of noon, and in the face of the world. That is, if there had been any world to see. I passed out of the city of dream by an ancient port, half gate, half hole in the wall. A labourer, to whom life was clearly no dream, stood staring at my camera with his muckrake in his hand. The city of dream was a city of much labour and scant wages to him. But he crossed himself when the eye of the zeast lens winked in his direction. Then at least he knew for a portent of evil. Then along another Almeida, dappled of light and shadow, with bees humming overhead, among the leaves and on the walk beneath a gardener who was indolently trying to light a damp heap of them. In vain they would not blaze. Sleepily he searched for a match to try again. He had all day to do it in. They were doubtless dream leaves. The cows might eat them, they might burn, or they might only lie and rot. No man knew which. Indeed, it was all the same. It was kismet. And as I watched, out of the dim incense-scented gloom of a medieval Christianity, I seemed to enter into the scarce-lit spaces of yet older faith. I gave the man a match. He was a Spaniard, yet he did not even thank me. He only struck it on his trousers and applied it to the leaves. They smoked a little and cheerfully, and as they never lighted, it could not be said that they went out. But the man was not discouraged. He went and sat down on a stone seat, and rolling a cigarette, asked for another match. He had done his best. All was as God willed. No, he did not go often to church. He did not see that it made much difference. He was a labourer in the pay of a rich proprietor. He got 2 euros, around 8 shillings a week. He did his work, or it did itself. As for his master, he never came near the place. He lived in Madrid. Here my pessimist entered into details unnecessary to be set down as to the method in which the young man spent his portion of goods in a far country. It was the one mentioned in Scripture. So long as one let him alone, the steward cared little, even when he was sober, and not at all when he was drunk. Meantime, what would you? He swept well, none praised him. He left the leaves to cumber the paths, none blamed him. In the meanwhile, there was tobacco, and on saints' days, a bottle of wine. His wife was dead, of course, but he had wanted her to live. Yes, he had loved her. As it happened to the wise man, so it happened to the fool. He saw no difference. No, his conscience did not ask any more of him than that he should spend his wages as he made them. And at the last, well, that which befalleth a dog befalleth also a man. One grave was as comfortable as another. I had begun my day with the bending Christian folk in the dim cathedral, the hum of prayer, the click of beads let fall by the faithful, in hopes that by their continual dropping they might wear the pavement of heaven. Then I had come on a gardener of Adam's ancient trade, and possibly also of the first man's ancient faith. So now, by the wayside, I met yet another philosopher with a scheme of his own, a philosopher with long ears, the longest I had ever seen manifest upon philosophic head. He was a donkey who had broken his tether. He had found a good bank of grass, fenced about with succulent reed, enduring bed straw and spiced with the thistle of his ancestors. He had all at command. His sides were plump with the fullness of them. The clear water of the canal was on the other side of the way to drink from when he was athirst. Cudgel had thwacked his sides, and would do so again, but he had forgotten the past, and had never learned to forecast the future. Wherein he was the better philosopher. His mind to him a kingdom was the realm of the present. It was shut in by twitch grass, barriered by ground ivy, and down the long vista which is futurity he would see only infinite thistle and infinite wild teasel. Death, he had never even heard of that. He had indeed seen things that lay still, things that the futile two-legged put into deep holes, but these were only asleep, and too wise to waken. Besides, the like would never happen to him, no such luck indeed. He had to be roused up that his panniers might be placed astride his back, and sometimes his master would mount up behind. But why think of such things? Had he yet eaten all the thistles? No. What was that large two-legged doing, standing before him with a black box under its arm? Was there corn in that box? Anything to eat? No. What then did the two-legged mean by taking up a philosopher's time? Onward then. Thistles in front of him, thistles to the right of him, thistles to left of him, thistles within him, whirls and whirls of thistles without end. Amen. And perhaps I had now happened upon the oldest religion of all, at any rate, that which is still the commonest. But in so brave a world, it was time to get back to life and my own thistles. For are there not dream thistles also? City of Dream is only one particular thistle, which seems to me sweeter than all the others. I was soon on the banks of the river, a still sweetly flowing river, most un-Spanish looking, full from bank to bank with the melting of the fresh snow on the mountains. A little drum lay certainly from the caving banks further up, but in the main quiet and large and purposeful only. Haply there was nothing for it to do in or about this city of dream. No mills to turn, no paper to wash, no power to generate. A few women, constant at their scrubbing boards, made with their tongues sufficiently far off, a pleasant clatter of sound. Otherwise, merely silence and the wash of water. Crossing an ancient bridge, I found myself upon a deserted river bank. Long alleys of white poplars, here and there a rough wooden seat. There was a sparkle of light through the leaves, a sudden coolness, then a running wave of silver as the wind flashed their undersides into view. No old world glooms or death and life philosophies here, but wind and earth and water making merry as of old, after the fashion the Greeks knew for the way of the gods. Two men seated under the shade looked inquiringly at my camera, and at me, but I had had enough of my species for one day. They might be philosophers or preachers in disguise, or only plain-sung donkeys. At any rate, I gave them a wide berth, including them, however, in my picture, to show that there were others as idle as I that day in the precincts of the City of Dream. Then I sat down and dreamed undisguisedly in an open glade, looking across at the battlement castle seen over a foreground of river reeds and tall oleander tufts. From here, Elseo seemed more dreamlike than ever. Actual larks were singing above the meadow flats. I might have been in Scotland, save for the rosy towers of the cathedral, the cinnamon-coloured soil, and the untouched bloom of antiquity, which was upon every work of man that I could see. Ah, these strange contrasts of Spain. Even as I sit, the breeze from the north strikes cool, and like a flash the rows of dusky willows turn silver grey, and the larks are blown about the sky on a wandering wind gust from the gorges behind, some back swirl doubtless of the long unwearying mistral of Provence, which is now breaking itself in vain against the barrier of the Pyrenees. The breeze is grateful, so grateful that while it lasts I climb back again to the plateau on which stands the citadel, complete outwardly to the eye, but in reality a mere shell, with a few companies of artillerymen camping in the corner of its vast and ruinous buildings. Far from railways, with the War Office administration at Madrid in a state of senile collapse, I question if anybody even thought of them. They were certainly forgotten at Elseo, nor did they in the least desire to be remembered. They blew no trumpets, they fired no sunset gun. The very sentry at the entrance betook himself within when he saw a visitor approaching. The door was shut, and had you been the Commander-in-Chief himself, especially if you had been the Commander-in-Chief, there would have been for you no admission. Back into the town again, I had been afoot so early that it was still only shaking itself awake. My matutinal friends of the dusky cathedral were doubtless but workpeople and countrywomen come in to market, for naturally the City of Dream lies long abed. Even at 10 o' the clock, they were only sweeping the cigar ends out of last night's cafes. The boys who did it were rubbing their eyes, and small wonder, for 3 in the morning had not seen them in their beds. The arcades of the streets were still invincibly gloomy. The morning puddles had not yet dried in the gutters, and by more than one sense a stranger was informed that in the City of Dream all was not illusion. But still the enchantment held, in spite of odours quasi-medieval. One could not proceed a score of yards without coming on a wooden overhanging balcony, a reach of brilliantly coloured tiles, a Moorish courtyard, or a charming characteristic group seated by the wayside. Generally, the younger women, if such there were, put up their hands to their faces or fled, not to the willows, with shrieks of simulated laughter. For the younger generation of Spain, even in the City of Dream, knows very well what a camera is, though, as I think, mine was the first of the English make that had ever penetrated thither. But it was otherwise with the elders. Sometimes an old woman would cross herself hastily, muttering the while, lest the black box should contain some imp of mischief. Mostly, however, they sat sternly sober, calm as mothers in Israel in the presence of unknown bewitchments. It would not do to tell them first that they were being photographed, still less to ask their permission, at least not before the shutter clicked, That must wait. But, once done, a courteous word, a lift of the hat, a smile, worked their way in the city of dream as elsewhere throughout the world. It was early afternoon before the sleepy streets awoke a little. Not that El Seo became even then any less a city of dream. Indeed, I think its afternoon mood was perhaps the most dreamlike of all. The sun was still high, and had at last vanquished the morning haze. Every particle of mist had been chased away. Heat and light filled the narrow streets as water fills a jug. All was a feast of colour. The many-coloured hangings, the striped awnings, the bright print of dresses of the girls at the street corners, the red and white tam o' shanter of the boys, mere imps of darkness they, made up a scene like some old untheatric fairyland. Perhaps that which one imagined long ago, couched in the corner of garret, over a first entrancing perusal of Sinbad the Sailor.